Rhetorical Quest.
We're now going to talk about relational dynamics, ways in which our relationships change. That's what the word dynamic means, is constantly changing. Relationships are necessary for human flourishing. They're something that we absolutely have to have. We have to have relationships. And we've known this for a very long time. I could go to the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible and talk about how God said it is not good for man to be alone, right? That every person needs to be with other people. Or I could talk about the Buddhist noble truths and point out how most of them are not things you can do by yourself. I could go into all of that, but I think that I want to start out with Aristotle. In Aristotle's Ethics, he talks about how there are 4 reasons for what is usually translated as friendship, that is, relationships with other human beings. One is just, he doesn't think we could really stop ourselves if we wanted to. Aristotle really believes that this is something at the core of what makes us human beings, of what we are. There's other animals like it. There are wolves, there are horses, there are cattle that just don't really do well on their own. But he says the reason that we get into relationships are more than that. We want to help other people. Aristotle argued that we have a stronger desire to help other people than we have to be helped. And I think most of us recognize that, right? We don't like it when we have to ask for help, but we love it when people ask us for help. He says you need human interactions, you need friendship to be virtuous. And he kind of said there were 2 parts of this. One is to act out the virtues, and the other is to have somebody to hold yourself up against, right? To know when you are not living up to virtues because you've got people close to you who are living up to them, and you see yourself falling short and you make adjustments. And finally, you need friends to know yourself. Aristotle said this, and I've talked before about Heidegger and his idea of thrownness and how we are just thrown into the universe and don't know anything about ourselves until our interactions with other people tell us. So Aristotle then argued much earlier than Heidegger that we need this to know ourselves. We need this friendship to know really who we are. Communication researchers today generally think about how there are dialectical tensions that are at work inside our self, our psyche, our soul. And these things are all needs. We need these things, and yet they are in contradiction to each other. That's why we say they are in dialectic. And so Adler, Proctor, and Manning give a list of 3 of these that I want to get into. I've seen other lists that have had different numbers, so I don't want to get too into that. But these 3 I think are pretty good. The first one is that we have a dialectical tension between our need for connection. We need to feel connected to other people, and our need for autonomy. We have a need to decide things for ourselves. So let's just take a simple thing like go to the store, right? Say I'm going to go to the store. Well, autonomously, I can just go to the store. But say I want to bring my wife with me to the store. Suddenly, I need to give up my autonomy of doing it when I want, the way I'd want to do it in order to build that connection with her. And I do want to have a connection with my wife. However, I also want to be able to do things the way I want, the way I like to do things. And these things are both needs that all people have that work inside us. The second dialectical tension that Adler, Proctor, and Manning list is this tension between openness and privacy, right? I need to be able to have people in my life who just, I can be myself with them, and I can do anything with them, and I can say anything I want from them. And I also need for those people not to know all this stuff about me that I just told them. These are both needs that I have in my life. I have this need to be open and this need to be private, and these needs are in tension in between them, and you have them in your life too. The final of these dialectical tensions that Adler, Proctor, and Manning talk about is the dialectical tension between predictability and novelty. And I have this need, and so do you, for things to kind of go the way that you expect them to go. If I came home today and my wife had painted the inside of our house green, that might cause problems with our landlord, but also I'm not ready for that. Right? I need to know what the house is going to look like when I get home. I'd probably be okay with it, but it would be kind of upsetting just for a few seconds, right? Because we have this need for things to be the way we expect them to be. When I go out to my car, I turn the key and I expect it to start, right? When I come into my office, I put my key in the lock of my office door and I turn it, I expect it to unlock. And when things don't go quite as we expect them, we get all nervous and scared. On the other hand, if everything is the same all the time, we have no novelty, and we get bored. And before long, we're wanting to do things to kind of make things a little bit different. And the thing is, if we do something to make things a little bit different, that's going to upset the predictability. And so we have these tensions inside of us. So all three of these tensions, right, are things that push and pull inside of us and pull against each other and pull in opposite directions and ultimately pull us both into and out of relationships. So we're going to talk about getting into and out of relationships and what that process is like. Mark Knapp posited that there are these 10 stages to relationship development, and that relationships tend to go through these 10 stages, and it's relatively predictable. We can kind of know where we're at, and I've liked this because it kind of gives me a map of where I am in my various friendships and relationships. So the first stage in this map is that all relationships begin by initiating. In fact, we initiate lots of times, several times a day. And I'll go to the store and I'll get a bottle of something to drink and I will set it on the counter and I will initiate a relationship with a person across from me. Now, most of the time, there is nothing in that initiation that builds enough of an interpersonal attraction for the relationship to go any further than that. Most of the time, I do not become best friends with the person who sells me my fizzy sweet beverages. That's just all there is to it. But every once in a while, you have one of these initiating times and you see something or you feel something that makes you want to pursue this relationship just a little bit further to kind of see what's next. And the next stage is experimenting. So you see somebody and, you kind of initiate, you give each other a smile and you look down and they are wearing just the coolest shoes. So you say, hey, those are cool shoes. And they say, thanks, I got these shoes at Walmart. When that happens, you've had two things happen, right? You have given some information about yourself, that you are the type of person who finds these kind of shoes interesting. Now, maybe they wouldn't have responded, oh, I got them at Walmart. They might have just, gross. Or they might have said, thank you. They didn't respond back. But sometimes they experiment too. So they tell you maybe where they got the shoes, right? At this point, they're throwing out some information about themselves. And I am the type of person who gets my shoes at this type of place. And then they see how you react, and you might say, oh, I go to that place too. It depends on what's going on. And somewhere in that conversation, most of the time, you kind of both decide not to pursue it any further. Most of the time, you'll somewhere in that experimentation just kind of decide that you don't want to do that. Now, you might meet that person again and experiment in different ways with that person again. But most of the time, most of your relationships won't move beyond that. They'll just be, and you can get to know somebody, like you can know their names after a while. You see them around campus a lot. You see them at your job a lot, something like that. You know their names and you know the information you've gotten from experimenting. But to say this person is really your friend would be kind of a stretch. Most of the people in your classes that you meet, at least in your face-to-face classes, your online classes might not necessarily even get this far. But most of your face-to-face classes that college students have, they get to this stage with most of the people in their class. There's a few where it moves on. Most of the students have that kind of a relationship with the professor. They moved into the experimenting stage, and that's as far as it goes. But every once in a while, something happens, and a person decides, you know what? I would like to be able to disclose more to this person. I would like to open myself up more to this person. And I would like it if they open themselves up to me. And sometimes when that happens, the other person is having the same kind of thought. I wish I could know more about this person. I want to open myself up more to this person. And this person, I want this person to open up to me. And you both feel that way. And when that happens, you move on to the intensifying stage. And the intensifying stage is where you engage in what we call massive mutual self-disclosure. You start telling the other person things about yourself that you haven't told anybody or haven't told very many people in your whole life. And they start telling you things about themselves that they don't just let everybody know this, right? And you start to get to know each other quite a bit, and you build these things. I love being in these moments, right? When I'm at the intensifying stage of a relationship, where I just really am enjoying talking to this person's enjoying talking to me. And sometimes, like, you can lose track of time. You just kind of look down and it's like, oh my gosh, I got to be at my work right now. I got to go, right? And you just take off because you kind of lost track in time and just in your conversation, right? And this is a really, really cool spot to be in. It's a wonderful spot to be in. And really at this level, there's still a good chance that you can just end the relationship here. Relationships don't have to go on beyond this level. They just don't. But at this point, most people start to feel like they want it to. And when that happens, they move on to the next stage. This next stage is integrating, or the integration phase, or the integrating phase. And this is the stage where you start to integrate the person into your life. You want them to meet your friends. You want them to meet your family. And then, the Girl Scout song, my little girls and Girl Scouts, and they have this song, then your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends, and the more we get together, the happier we'll be. And that's kind of what happens at this integrating stage. You introduce them to your friends, or maybe even your family. They introduce you to their friends, and as you get to know each other, you become integrated into each other's lives. You become friends. At this point, I would consider anybody who I've integrated with at some point, even if we're not really integrated right now, they're still my friends. I consider those people my friends, unless we had some kind of falling out, which I almost never did. But unless we've had some kind of falling out, I consider that person my friend. At that point, you're not getting away from me being my friend. And so that's kind of where we are now. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've moved on to the next stage, and the next stage is a really important one. And that next stage is bonding. A lot of relationships never get to the bonding level. Bonding is a formal and sometimes legal declaration of the relationship. Maybe you had somebody you met last year on campus, and I'm assuming I'm talking to college students here, and maybe that person and you initiated, you experimented, you intensified, you integrated, and now you've decided, you know what, I want this person to be my roommate next year. So you sign a lease together. Now, maybe in a couple of weeks, you're going to hate each other. That's a possibility. But it is not easy to get out of that lease. You are now legally obligated to each other, right? Maybe you've got a friend who you started talking about kind of your dreams and your hopes, and found they had similar dreams and hopes, and you spent a lot of time talking about this thing you'd like to do, and so you talk about it, and eventually you start to bring other people from your circle into each other, and then at the end you're like, you know what, we both want to do this, we both want this dream to happen. Let's take out a loan with both of us as signatories on it, and let's start a business doing this thing. Now, maybe, again, pretty quickly, you might decide that you don't like each other not long after that. Well, still, you've got this business together, and you're going to have to do some kind of chicanery to figure out how to get out of that. It's not going to be easy. And that's the thing about the bonding, right? The bonding is where you find some way where after this, if we don't get along, it's going to be hard, right? After this, we are bound in some way. And that's when you are bonded, and it can be scary, should be scary, right? You should be scared of bonding yourself to another person. It should be something that makes you feel a little bit nervous, where at this point, anything that you do is going to affect them, and what they do is going to affect you, and you are just going to be affected by each other. And that can be a really powerful thing. Usually, not long after bonding, you start to move to the next stage, which is the first stage of what we call the coming apart stages. It doesn't mean your relationship is about to fall apart. Don't worry. But you move on to the next stage. But that first stage of coming apart is differentiating. Differentiating is healthy. It's good. It's smart. It's where you say that this is my part and that is your part. And we're just not going to really interfere in each other's parts. We're just going to be different from each other in this area. You know, on Tuesday nights I go bowling. You can sure go bowling with me. But if you want to do something else on Tuesday nights, I'm sorry. Tuesday night's my bowling night, right? This is differentiating, and it's where you kind of just decide we need to take things in separate directions, or I need to focus on me, and I would really encourage you to focus on you, right? This is differentiating. And while it is the first stage of coming apart, it's actually a really good thing. And if you can get yourself into this space and differentiating and bonding where you can control the openness and closedness of the openness of your relationship, or the privacy of your relationship, the more you can control that right in this area, it can be a really good thing. But sometimes it's hard. sometimes this differentiating is hard, and sometimes we feel like we just need to lay down some ground rules for the rest of this relationship. And when that happens, we move on to the next stage. So you move on to that next stage. You move on to the what we call the circumscribing. I've also seen it called the limiting stage. And I like that word limiting because that's what you do here. You set boundaries. You set up things where you just are not going to be crossing certain lines. Just like when you move on beyond this, you are out of bounds and we can't do it. And again, setting up boundaries is, again, a healthy part of a relationship. Having good, healthy boundaries, being able to say no when your partner asks you to do something, because that is just your boundary, is good. Now, in this differentiating and circumscribing stage, sometimes you move back and forth, and you can end up fighting for years. Don't worry about it, right? These four at the top, the integrating, bonding, differentiating, and circumscribing, are what we call relational maintenance stages. So you're in the coming apart stage, but you're in the relational maintenance stage too. You can fight as you're trying to figure out what your boundaries are, what your partner's boundaries are. There can be a lot of, and I was like, I can't live with that boundary because then I don't have this. All of this can be a lot of real difficulty, right? And it's worth it to stay in that difficulty, right? As long as you do that, you can kind of move around up here at the top, differentiating, more bonding, more integrating, right? The more that you can get good differentiation and good boundary setting, this can all be really good stuff. So don't worry about the fact that you're there, but sometimes the next stage is a little bit more worrying, although it's not the end of the relationship either, but a little bit more worrying. And that is this slightly more troubling stage is called stagnating. And when your relationship becomes stagnant, it becomes extremely predictable again, right? Kind of almost like it was up in the bonding. It can be really nice, especially if you've been arguing and fighting a lot. And now you're not fighting, you're not arguing anymore because you're not really learning anything new in the relationship and they're not learning anything new about you. And sometimes people look at these stagnant relationships and say this is bad, but it's not. It's not. I think that most healthy adults have a stagnant relationship with their parents, right? They don't fight with their parents anymore. They don't get in big arguments. They're just like, they're there and they talk and they love each other. And that's all they really need from each other. So stagnating isn't necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes it can get boring. And when it gets boring, we might move to the next stage. And so this stage of avoiding is really hard to come back from. If you've been there in your relationship where you just really don't want to be in the same place at the same time. Now, it could be that you've been fighting a lot. And then you went through a stagnating stage and now you don't want to do anything to upset the apple cart because you don't want to go to that fighting. And so you just start avoiding each other. I realized recently I was in an avoiding stage with somebody I knew, and I'll tell you how I realized that. I pulled up to the gym here on campus and I saw that person's car was out front. And I decided, you know what? I'm just going to go to the gym later today. I just didn't want to deal with that person right now. We hadn't had a long relationship, but we had kind of gotten to where at the gym, this person wasn't really respecting my boundaries, that I have a brief time to work out and then I need to go. And this person was always trying to talk to me. And so I'm just like, you know what? Now I am just going to avoid that person. And it doesn't mean I dislike them. But right now I'm going to avoid that person. And that final stage is terminating. Now, if the bonding had been really, really formal, right? And you had really decided you're going to move in together, you're going to start a business together, you got married, right? The bonding was a pretty strong legal situation. When that happens, the terminating also has to be formal and legal. And the more formal the bonding was, the more formal the termination has to be. And that's just kind of the way it is. But at that point, the relationship has ended. But you know, or at least I hope you know, that not all relationships necessarily go on to termination. Conville drew a picture of the way he talked about relationship as more of a spiral, where people move from being secure in their relationship to having that security start to disintegrate as they are no longer as integrated with each other, to alienation where they're just not spending as much time together, to a resynthesis. And that long-term relationships actually do this a lot, where they move through this spiral, and it's not necessarily an end. But I'd love to hear from you. I want you to tell me about your relationships and how they've fit into these models, or the way they haven't fit in these models. Maybe you could tell me a really great way in which you've been able to maintain a relationship and manage these dialectical tensions, and what kind of strategies that you use to do that so that you don't move on to that avoiding and terminating stage. All of that would be really wonderful to hear from you. So if you're one of my students, I would like you to put it in the discussion prompt that we have below. But if you are somebody who's just watching this for your own edification on YouTube, I would still really like to hear from you. Go ahead and put your comments down in the comment section underneath this video.